Derek Webb had been mopping the same observation deck for the past 20 minutes, lost in his own thoughts as he watched distant stars twinkle through the massive viewport. Working as a janitor on an intergalactic diplomatic station wasn't exactly what he'd imagined doing with his life, but the pay was decent and the view beat staring at office walls back on Earth. He dipped his mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and continued his methodical work across the polished floor. The peaceful routine shattered when emergency alarms suddenly screamed through every corridor of the station. Derek's head snapped up as red warning lights began flashing in chaotic patterns along the walls. His radio crackled to life with panicked voices shouting over each other, but he could barely make out what anyone was saying through the chaos. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. A high-pitched shriek echoed through the hallways, followed by what could only be described as a roar. But it wasn't quite like any animal sound he'd ever heard before. It had an otherworldly quality that sent shivers down his spine. 3 dragon hatchlings from the Drakmar Empire had somehow escaped from their diplomatic envoy's specially designed containment unit. Nobody quite knew how it happened. Maybe a malfunction in the security system, or perhaps the creatures were just cleverer than anyone had given them credit for. Either way, they were loose now and the entire station was paying the price. Derek stood frozen with his mop in hand as he watched the chaos unfold before his eyes. The creatures came tearing around the corner at the far end of the corridor, and he got his first real look at them. Each one was roughly the size of a large dog, maybe about 80 or 90 pounds, but they looked far more dangerous than any dog he'd ever seen. Their bodies were covered in scales that shimmered with iridescent colors, deep blues and purples that shifted to greens and golds depending on how the light hit them. But the scales weren't what grabbed his attention. It was the small jets of superheated plasma they were breathing from their mouths as they ran. The blasts weren't huge, nothing like the massive fireballs you'd see in movies, but they were hot enough to leave scorch marks on the walls and melt through anything they hit directly. One blast struck a decorative plant near the elevator bay, and the entire thing went up in flames within seconds. The station transformed into absolute pandemonium in the span of just a few minutes. Alien diplomats from what seemed like every corner of the galaxy came running out of conference rooms and offices, fleeing in complete terror. Derek watched as the Voltarian ambassador, a tall, blue-skinned creature who usually carried himself with such dignity, nearly trampled 2 of his own aides in his desperate rush to reach a sealed security chamber. The ambassador's fancy robes tangled around his legs as he ran, and he didn't even stop to help when one of his aides fell. Security teams mobilized immediately, but Derek could tell they were scrambling. They hadn't trained for this exact scenario. Guards came running from different directions carrying stun weapons, trying to coordinate some kind of strategy to corner the creatures. But the hatchlings moved incredibly fast. Far faster than anything their size should reasonably be able to move. Their legs were powerful and springy, launching them forward in bursts of speed that made them nearly impossible to track. Every time a security team thought they had the creatures cornered, the hatchlings would suddenly change direction or leap right over the guards' heads. And whenever someone got too close or made a move that seemed threatening, the hatchlings would lash out violently with their claws, tails, or those deadly plasma breaths. One guard got too confident and tried to grab one of them with his bare hands. Big mistake. The hatchling whipped its tail around so fast it was just a blur, catching the guard right in the chest and sending him flying backward into a wall. Derek's station manager, a nervous woman named Patricia who'd always seemed way too high-strung for this job, came running past him screaming into her communicator. Lock down all non-essential sections. Get civilians to the safe zones. Someone call the Drakmorian delegation and tell them their monsters are destroying my station. But Derek barely heard her. He'd stopped watching the chaos and started really observing the creatures themselves. Something about their behavior struck him as odd. While everyone else was seeing dangerous predators on a rampage, Derek noticed something different in the way they moved and acted. The hatchlings weren't hunting. They weren't stalking prey or attacking with any kind of organized purpose. Their movements were erratic and defensive rather than predatory. When they breathed those jets of plasma, it wasn't aimed at people specifically. It was aimed at anything that moved toward them or made loud noises nearby. Their eyes, which glowed with an inner light that was probably natural to their species, were wide and darting in every direction. Their scales, which had seemed so beautiful at first, were now standing partially on end like the hackles on a frightened dog. These weren't monsters on a killing spree. These were terrified babies. Derek had grown up on a small farm in rural Montana before moving to the city and eventually ending up in space. He'd spent countless hours working with animals, horses that spooked at shadows, dogs that had been abused and didn't trust anyone, even a bear cub once that had gotten separated from its mother and wandered onto their property. He knew what fear looked like in an animal's eyes, and he was seeing it now in these alien creatures. They were in a completely strange environment, separated from everything they knew and everyone they trusted. The air probably smelled wrong to them. The sounds were all unfamiliar. The lighting was different from their home world. And everywhere they turned, large creatures were chasing them, shouting at them, pointing weapons at them. Of course they were lashing out. What else would babies do when they were this scared? Derek carefully set his mop down against the wall, leaning it in place so it wouldn't fall over. The security chief's voice crackled through the overhead speakers, ordering all non-essential personnel to evacuate to the safe zones immediately. Patricia grabbed his arm as she ran past. "Derek, didn't you hear? We need to go. Those things are dangerous." He gently pulled his arm free from her grip. "I know. You go ahead. I'll be right behind you." She gave him a look that suggested she thought he'd lost his mind, but she didn't have time to argue. She took off running toward the nearest safe zone, her shoes clicking frantically against the floor. Derek stood alone in the corridor now, everyone else having fled. He could hear the hatchlings in the next section over, still causing chaos. He could hear the security teams trying to coordinate. He could hear the screaming alarms that nobody had thought to turn off yet. He took a deep breath, straightened his maintenance uniform, and started walking calmly toward all the noise. He was walking directly toward the danger while everyone else with any sense was running away from it. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe he had lost his mind. But something in his gut told him that these creatures didn't need weapons or cages or tranquilizers. They just needed someone who wasn't afraid of them. Someone who could see past the scales and the plasma breath to the scared babies underneath. And if nobody else was going to try, then Derek figured he might as well give it a shot. After all, what was the worst that could happen? Derek followed the sounds of chaos through 2 more corridors before he finally reached the main atrium. This was one of the largest open spaces on the entire station. A massive circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the space outside. Normally, it was a peaceful place where diplomats would meet for informal conversations while enjoying the spectacular view of distant nebulas and passing starships. Right now it looked like a war zone. The 3 hatchlings had backed themselves into a corner against one of the enormous viewing ports. The transparent wall behind them showed nothing but the endless darkness of space dotted with stars, and Derek realized the creatures had literally run out of places to go. They were trapped, cornered, and that made them even more dangerous than before. Security teams had positioned themselves at every entrance to the atrium, at least 20 armed guards in total. They flanked the doorways with their weapons raised and ready, fingers hovering near triggers. The team leader, a hulking alien with gray skin and 4 arms, was speaking rapidly into his communicator while keeping 2 of his eyes locked on the hatchlings. Derek could see the tension in every guard's posture. They were waiting for the order to fire. The hatchlings themselves looked absolutely terrified. They huddled together in a defensive cluster, their tails intertwined for comfort. Every few seconds, one of them would hiss loudly and spit a small jet of flame toward any guard who shifted position or made a sound. Scorch marks decorated the walls all around them, evidence of their desperate attempts to keep everyone at bay. Derek heard his name crackle through someone's radio as he walked past the security line. "Is that Webb? Someone stop that idiot before he gets himself killed." But Derek didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He walked right past the guards, past their weapons, past the safety barriers they'd erected. He heard several voices shouting warnings at him, telling him to get back, to take cover, that he was violating direct security orders. He ignored all of it. When he was about 10 feet away from the hatchlings, Derek simply sat down. He didn't make any grand gestures or sudden movements. He just crossed his legs, settled himself on the polished floor, and sat there quietly. The cold surface was uncomfortable, but he didn't care. He kept his hands visible and relaxed in his lap, making sure the creatures could see he wasn't holding any weapons or tools. The hatchlings' attention immediately snapped to him. All 3 heads turned in his direction, their glowing eyes focusing on this new threat. They hissed in unison, a sound that reminded Derek of steam escaping from a pressure valve mixed with the warning rattle of a snake. It was loud enough that he felt it vibrate in his chest. One of the hatchlings, the largest of the 3 with scales that shimmered more gold than the others, took a step forward. Its mouth opened slightly, and Derek could see the faint glow of building plasma in the back of its throat. The creature was preparing to breathe fire directly at him, and at this distance there was no way it would miss. Derek still didn't move. He maintained eye contact with the creature but kept his gaze soft, not challenging or aggressive. It was the same technique he'd used countless times with frightened animals back home. Direct staring was a threat in the animal kingdom, but looking away completely suggested you were prey. The trick was to find that middle ground, to show you saw them without challenging them. "Hey there, buddy," Derek said softly. His voice was barely above a whisper, gentle and calm. "I know you're scared. I know everything seems really wrong right now. But I'm not here to hurt you, okay? I just want to help." The hatchling tilted its head slightly, clearly confused by his lack of fear. The glow in its throat dimmed just a bit, though it didn't fade completely. Behind it, the other two hatchlings shuffled nervously, unsure what to make of this strange creature that wasn't running away or attacking. Derek continued speaking in that same soft, soothing tone. He wasn't saying anything particularly important. Mostly just reassuring nonsense about how everything was going to be okay, how they were safe, how nobody was going to hurt them. The words themselves probably didn't matter. The creatures almost certainly didn't understand English. But tone was universal. Fear and aggression had a sound. So did calm and safety. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 30 seconds, Derek slowly reached into the pocket of his maintenance jumpsuit. The movement made all three hatchlings tense up again, their bodies coiling like springs ready to explode into action. Derek moved even slower, making sure every motion was deliberate and predictable. His fingers closed around his lunch bag. His friend Lisa from the engineering department had packed it for him that morning. She always made extra food and shared it with him because she said he never ate enough. Today's lunch was a turkey sandwich with lettuce and tomato, an apple, and some kind of homemade cookie that smelled like cinnamon. Derek pulled out the sandwich and unwrapped it carefully. The crinkling of the wrapper made the hatchlings flinch, but they didn't attack. He broke off a small piece of the turkey, making sure to get some that wasn't covered in condiments or vegetables. Just plain meat about the size of a quarter. He tossed it gently toward the nearest hatchling, making sure to throw it with an underhand motion that didn't look aggressive. The morsel landed on the floor about 2 feet in front of the golden-scaled one who'd nearly barbecued him a minute ago. The creature stared at the meat for a long moment. Its nostrils flared wide as it sniffed the air, processing this new smell. The other two hatchlings craned their necks to see what was happening, equally curious but more cautious. Finally, the golden one took a tentative step forward. Then another. It lowered its head slowly, never taking its eyes off Derek, and sniffed the meat directly. Its long, forked tongue flicked out, purple in color and surprisingly delicate, and touched the turkey. In one quick motion, the hatchling snatched up the meat and swallowed it whole. Derek watched as its throat worked to push the food down. Then something amazing happened. The creature's aggressive posture relaxed just slightly. Its scales, which had been standing on end like a porcupine's quills, began to flatten back down against its body. The golden hatchling looked at Derek with what he could only describe as curiosity replacing some of the fear in its eyes. It took another step closer, then another, until it was just a few feet away from him. Derek broke off another piece of turkey and held it out on his open palm this time, keeping his hand low and steady. "That's it," he murmured encouragingly. "See? Nothing scary here. Just food and a friend." The hatchling studied his hand for several long seconds. Derek could feel his arms starting to tremble from holding it so still, but he didn't move a muscle. This was the critical moment. The creature had to make the choice to trust him on its own. He couldn't force it. Finally, moving with surprising gentleness for something that had been breathing fire just minutes ago, the hatchling stretched its neck forward and delicately plucked the meat from Derek's palm with its teeth. The sensation was strange, warm and slightly rough but not painful. The creature's breath smelled like sulfur and hot metal, probably a byproduct of whatever biological process let it produce plasma. The other two hatchlings, seeing their siblings' success and bravery, began inching forward as well. One had scales that shimmered more blue and purple, while the smallest of the three had an almost silver tint to its coloring. They moved together, clearly taking comfort in each other's presence as they approached this strange, soft creature who smelled like cleaning supplies and offered food. Derek continued breaking off small pieces of his lunch and distributing them among the three hatchlings. Within just a few minutes, they had formed a loose semicircle around him, accepting pieces of turkey, bits of bread, and even some of the apple directly from his hands. The smallest one, the silver-scaled hatchling, grew bold enough to rest its chin on Derek's knee while waiting for the next offering. The atrium had gone completely silent. Every security guard stood frozen in disbelief. Nobody was shouting orders anymore. Nobody was moving at all. They just watched in stunned amazement as the human janitor sat peacefully on the floor, hand-feeding three of the galaxy's most dangerous creatures like they were puppies begging for treats. Derek felt the golden hatchling press against his side, its body warm from the internal heat that powered its plasma breath. The vibration started low in its chest, a deep, rumbling sound that he felt more than heard. Then it grew louder, filling the quiet atrium with a sound like distant thunder mixed with a cat's purr. All three hatchlings were purring now, a sound of pure contentment. And Derek couldn't help but smile. Maybe he hadn't lost his mind after all. The massive doors at the far end of the atrium slid open with a mechanical hiss that echoed through the silent chamber. Every head turned to watch as the Drakmorian ambassador entered, and Derek had to admit the sight was impressive even from where he sat on the floor. Lady SH stood nearly 8 feet tall, her body covered in scales that made the hatchlings look dull by comparison. Deep crimson plates covered her chest and back, edged with gold that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Her neck was long and elegant, almost swan-like, and her head was crowned with a series of curved horns that swept backward like a natural headdress. She wore elaborate ceremonial robes made from some kind of fabric that shimmered between purple and black, marked with symbols Derek couldn't begin to understand. 6 guards flanked her, each one nearly as impressive as the ambassador herself. They wore armor that looked like it had been carved from obsidian, polished to a mirror shine. Each guard carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, and their eyes, which glowed the same way the hatchlings did, swept the room constantly, assessing every potential threat. Lady SH had clearly expected to find carnage. Her expression was set in hard lines, prepared for the worst. Derek could see it in the way she held herself, in the tension of her jaw, in how her clawed hands were already clenched into fists. She was a mother expecting to find her children had hurt someone, or worse that someone had hurt them. Instead, she froze mid-step when she saw the scene before her. The human janitor, this impossibly small, fragile-looking creature in his plain gray maintenance uniform, sat cross-legged on the floor like he was having a picnic in a park. The 3 imperial hatchlings, the most precious cargo in her entire delegation, were curled around him like he was their nestmate. The golden one had its head resting on his lap. The blue-purple one was draped across his legs. The silver one was pressed against his side, its tail wrapped loosely around his waist. And they were purring. All 3 of them were producing that deep, resonant sound that Drakmorians only made when they felt completely safe and content. Lady SH felt something catch in her throat. She hadn't heard that sound from any of them since they'd left the homeworld 3 weeks ago. The hatchlings had been miserable during the entire journey, crying, refusing food, constantly agitated by the unfamiliar environment of the ship. She'd been worried sick about them, wondering if bringing them on this diplomatic mission had been a terrible mistake. Yet here they were, more peaceful and content than she'd seen them in weeks, with a species they'd never encountered before. The ambassador took a cautious step forward, and her movement immediately drew the attention of all 3 hatchlings. Their heads snapped up in unison, and the purring stopped abruptly. The golden one hissed at her, their guardian and protector, with genuine warning in its voice. Derek felt the change in the creature's demeanor instantly. Their bodies tensed, their scales began to rise again, and he could feel the heat building in their throats as they prepared to defend their position. He gently placed his hand on the golden hatchling's neck, just behind its head where he discovered it liked to be scratched. "Hey now," he said softly, using that same calm tone he'd been using all along. "That's no way to treat a lady. She's just worried about you. She's not going to hurt anyone." The effect was immediate and stunning. The golden hatchling glanced back at Derek, seemed to consider his words even though it couldn't possibly understand English, and then settled back down. The other 2 followed its lead, though they kept their glowing eyes fixed warily on the approaching ambassador. Lady SH stopped moving entirely. Her own eyes, larger and more intelligent than the hatchlings, a deep amber color that reminded Derek of honey, widened in disbelief. She looked at Derek like he was some kind of mythical creature, something that shouldn't exist in the known universe. "Impossible," she whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the quiet atrium. Her translator device rendered her native language into English that everyone could understand. "You possess the calm presence." Derek had no idea what that meant, so he just shrugged slightly, careful not to disturb the hatchlings. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't understand. I was just trying to help calm them down. They seemed scared." Behind Lady SH, the station's entire command crew had gathered. Commander Vex still pushed to the front of the crowd, his blue Voltarian skin looking even paler than usual. Derek had seen the commander maybe 3 times in the 2 years he'd worked on the station, and the alien had never once acknowledged his existence. Now the commander was staring at him like he'd just sprouted wings and flown around the room. "Someone explained to me," Vextil said in his clicking insectoid voice, "how a maintenance worker accomplished what an entire security team could not." Those creatures were tearing through my station like a natural disaster, and now they're... He gestured helplessly at the peaceful scene, napping. Dr. Helen Morrison pushed her way through the crowd, her data pad already out and recording everything. Helen was one of the few other humans on the station, a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms. Derek had shared lunch with her a few times in the cafeteria. She was nice enough, if a bit intense about her work. Commander, with respect, I think we're witnessing something that could change everything we understand about human capabilities, Helen said, her eyes never leaving Derek and the hatchlings. Her fingers flew across her data pad, taking notes at a frantic pace. May I approach? Lady S.H. Kareth nodded slowly, still looking somewhat dazed. Helen walked forward carefully, stopping a respectful distance away from Derek. She crouched down to get a better view, and Derek could see the excitement and wonder written all over her face. Derek, do you have any idea what you've done here? She asked, her voice barely containing her enthusiasm. Fed them my lunch? Derek offered, earning a surprised laugh from several of the watching crowd. Even a few of the security guards cracked smiles, though they tried to hide it. Helen shook her head, grinning. You've done something that should be theoretically impossible. Dracmorian hatchlings in their first year of life are considered the most dangerous creatures in the known galaxy. Their aggression is instinctive, their plasma breath is lethal, and they attack anything they perceive as a threat. There are documented cases of full-grown Dracmorian warriors being killed by hatchlings they were trying to protect. She gestured at the three peaceful creatures currently using Derek as a combination pillow and heating pad. Yet you, with no training, no protective equipment, no knowledge of their species, walked up to three terrified hatchlings and had them eating out of your hand, literally, in less than 10 minutes. Do you understand how unprecedented that is? Derek looked down at the silver hatchling, which had started purring again. Its scales were smooth under his hand, warm but not uncomfortably hot. I just treated them like I'd treat any scared animal. They weren't really attacking people, they were defending themselves because everyone was treating them like monsters. Lady S.H. Kareth moved closer now, slowly enough that the hatchlings didn't react with alarm this time. She knelt on the floor near Derek, her elaborate robes pooling around her. Up close, Derek could see that her eyes were wet, though he wasn't sure if Dracmorians cried the same way humans did. Among my people, she said quietly, only 1 in 10,000 is born with what we call the compresence. It is a gift that cannot be taught, cannot be learned, cannot be replicated through any amount of training or study. Those who possess it can soothe even the most aggressive hatchling, can walk among fully grown dragons without fear, can communicate intent and emotion without words. She reached out slowly and touched the golden hatchling's head. This time it didn't hiss at her. It accepted her touch, leaning into her hand while still maintaining contact with Derek. I have lived for 300 of your years, and I have met only 5 individuals who possess this gift. All of them were Dracmorian, born and raised among dragons, steeped in our culture and ways. Lady S.H. Kareth looked directly at Derek, and he saw something in her expression that looked like awe mixed with confusion. You are human. Your species has never encountered a Dracmorian dragon until a few decades ago. You have no cultural knowledge of our ways, no training in dragon handling, no understanding of our biology or psychology. Yet you walked up to 3 imperial hatchlings, the children of our empress herself, and demonstrated the calm presence as naturally as breathing. The weight of what she was saying finally started to sink in for Derek. These weren't just some random alien creatures. These were royalty. He'd been sitting here scratching the ears of alien princes and princesses like they were farm dogs. Oh, he said weakly. I probably should have asked permission first, huh? Commander Vex still stepped forward, his 4 arms crossed in what Derek had learned was the Voltarian equivalent of putting your hands on your hips when you were annoyed. The commander's translator crackled as he spoke, his clicking language turning into stern English words. Human Derek Webb, you violated direct security orders, endangered yourself with hostile creatures, and created an unauthorized diplomatic incident. I require a full explanation of your actions immediately. Derek looked up at the towering alien commander, then down at the 3 hatchlings who were still contentedly sprawled across him like oversized cats. The golden one had fallen asleep, its breathing slow and even. The silver one was playing with one of Derek's shoelaces, batting at it gently with its claws. Well, sir, I know it looks bad when you put it like that, but I really didn't think I was creating an incident. I just saw they were scared and thought maybe I could help. Scared? Vextil's mandibles clicked in what might have been disbelief. These creatures destroyed 3 hallways, injured 2 security personnel, and caused 500,000 credits in property damage. They were clearly engaged in aggressive behavior. With respect, Commander, Derek said carefully, they weren't being aggressive. They were being defensive. There's a difference. Helen Morrison had moved closer now, her datapad forgotten as she watched Derek interact with the creatures. Derek, explain what you mean. Help us understand what you saw that we didn't. Derek thought about how to put it into words. He'd never been great at explaining things, he was much better at just doing them. But everyone was staring at him now, waiting for an answer, so he had to try. Okay, so back on Earth, I grew up on a farm in Montana. We had horses, cattle, dogs, cats, and sometimes wild animals would wander onto our property. Black bears mostly, sometimes coyotes. And I learned pretty quick that there's a huge difference between an animal that's hunting and an animal that's scared. He gently stroked the golden hatchling's neck as he spoke, and it made a small contented sound in its sleep. When an animal is hunting or being aggressive for real, there's a pattern to it. They're focused. They're calculating. They wait for the right moment to strike. They go for vulnerable spots. But these little guys weren't doing any of that. Derek gestured at the scorch marks on the walls around them. Look at where they were shooting their fire. It's random, scattered, not aimed at people specifically. They were shooting at anything that moved or made noise near them. That's not hunting behavior, that's panic. And the way they backed themselves into this corner? A predator would never trap itself like that. They did it because they were running away, not attacking. Lady S.H. Kareth had settled onto the floor now, sitting in a way that reminded Derek of how cats loaf with their legs tucked under them. She was watching him with intense interest, and he noticed that several other aliens had moved closer to hear him better. Continue, please, she said softly. This is fascinating. Well, I saw their eyes, Derek said. They were wide, darting around everywhere, not focusing on anything. That's fear. And their scales were all standing up, kind of like how a cat's fur stands on end when it's spooked, or how a dog's hackles raise. They were trying to look bigger and more threatening because they felt small and vulnerable. He paused, making sure he was explaining it right. So I figured if they're scared, what they need isn't more threats. They need someone to show them it's safe. Someone who's not going to chase them or point weapons at them or yell. Just someone who's going to sit down, be calm, and treat them like they're not monsters. Dr. Helen Morrison was nodding enthusiastically, her scientific mind clearly piecing together connections. Derek, what you're describing is an incredibly sophisticated form of pattern recognition and emotional intelligence. You're reading micro-expressions, body language, behavioral cues, all in a completely alien species you've never encountered before. And you're doing it instinctively. One of the Drakmorian guards, a female with dark red scales and amber eyes, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was deep and melodic. Ambassador, if I may? What the human describes matches exactly what we teach in the Dragon Handler Academy on the homeworld. Reading fear versus aggression, understanding defensive postures, recognizing panic behavior. But these courses take years to complete, and many students never master the skills. Lady S.H. Kareth made a humming sound that her translator didn't bother to convert, suggesting it was more emotional than linguistic. Yes, that is precisely why I am so stunned. Derek accomplished in moments what we struggled to teach over years. A crystalline trade representative, whose entire body seemed to be made of living geometric patterns of light, floated forward. Its voice came through a speaker it carried since it had no mouth. Perhaps we should consider that humans possess some form of telepathy? An ability to sense emotions across species barriers. Derek shook his head immediately. No, nothing like that. I can't read minds or sense feelings. It's just observation and experience. He tried to think of how to explain it better. Okay, so humans evolved on a world that was really, really dangerous for us. We weren't the biggest or strongest or fastest creatures on Earth. We didn't have claws or armor or natural weapons. What we had was our brains and our ability to work together. Helen jumped in, clearly excited to support this line of thinking. He's right. Humans spent hundreds of thousands of years as prey animals as much as predators. We had to learn to read the behavior of creatures that could kill us. To know when a predator was stalking versus just passing through, when an animal was likely to attack versus flee. Our survival literally depended on understanding animal psychology. But it wasn't just about avoiding predators, Derek added. We also learned to work with animals. We turned wolves into dogs over thousands of years. We domesticated horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens. We even convinced cats to live with us, and anyone who knows cats knows that's not easy. We figured out how to communicate with creatures that didn't speak our language. He looked down at the hatchlings again. The blue-purple one had rolled onto its back, exposing its softer underbelly scales while keeping one eye half open to watch him. It was a sign of trust that Derek recognized even in this alien creature. We learned to use body language, tone of voice, patience. We learned that forcing an animal to do something usually backfires, but if you can make them feel safe and show them you're not a threat, they'll often choose to trust you on their own. Lady S.H. Kareth was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone listen. What you are describing, Derek, is something we Drakmorians believed was unique to species who evolved alongside dragons. We thought the calm presence was tied to our specific evolutionary history, our specific neural pathways, our specific way of processing the world. She gestured at the peaceful hatchlings. Yet here you are, proof that this ability transcends species, transcends biology, transcends evolutionary history. Humans developed this gift through a completely different path, driven by completely different circumstances. But the result is the same, perhaps even more powerful because you can apply it to creatures you have never seen before. Commander Vex still had uncrossed his arms, and his posture had shifted from stern to thoughtful. If what the ambassador suggests is true, this has significant implications. Humans may possess a unique capability for cross-species communication and animal handling that surpasses any known species. Not just animal handling, Helen said, her eyes bright with the implications. Think about what this means for diplomacy, for first contact situations, for integration of new species into galactic civilization. If humans have a natural ability to read emotional states and respond appropriately across species barriers, we could serve as mediators, translators, bridges between cultures that struggle to understand each other. Derek felt somewhat overwhelmed by the direction this conversation was taking. He'd just been trying to calm down some scared babies, and now everyone was talking about changing galactic civilization. I really don't think I did anything that special, he protested weakly. The silver hatchling chose that moment to crawl fully into Derek's lap, curl up into a ball, and fall asleep while purring loud enough that everyone could hear it. Lady S.H. Kareth smiled, an expression that showed a lot of very sharp teeth but somehow still managed to look warm. Derek Webb, the fact that you think this is not special only proves how naturally this ability comes to you. You have given me much to think about, and much to report to the Imperial Court. The diplomatic negotiations that were supposed to wrap up by early afternoon stretched well into the evening. Derek had assumed he'd be dismissed once the initial crisis was over, but the hatchlings had other ideas. Every time he tried to stand up or move away, all three would immediately wake from their dozing and crowd around him with worried chirps and small whimpers. Lady S.H. Kareth had gently suggested that perhaps it would be best if Derek stayed for the duration of the meetings, and Commander Vex, still looking somewhat shell-shocked by the entire situation, had readily agreed. So Derek found himself sitting on the floor of the main conference hall while ambassadors from a dozen different worlds debated trade agreements and territorial boundaries. Someone had been kind enough to bring him a cushion after the first hour, when they noticed he kept shifting his weight uncomfortably on the hard floor. Helen Morrison had brought him lunch from the cafeteria, a real lunch this time since the hatchlings had eaten his first one. The three Imperial hatchlings treated the whole affair like it was completely normal. They slept curled around Derek during the boring parts of the negotiations. When they woke up, they played gentle games with each other, wrestling and tumbling in ways that would have been terrifying if Derek didn't now understand they were just being playful. The Golden One seemed to have claimed Derek's work boots as a personal treasure and kept trying to drag one away, only to bring it back and drop it at his feet like a dog with a favorite toy. The silver hatchling had developed a fascination with Derek's hands. It would watch his fingers move for minutes at a time, occasionally reaching out to gently touch them with its nose. When station personnel brought Derek food, all three hatchlings would inspect every single item before allowing him to eat it. They'd sniff the sandwich, examine the fruit, even taste test his water by dipping their tongues into the glass. It was like having the galaxy's most overprotective and slightly terrifying bodyguards. During a recess in the negotiations, Lady S.H. Kareth approached Derek again. She'd been watching him and the hatchlings all day with an expression that Derek couldn't quite read, though he was getting better at recognizing when she was deep in thought. She settled onto the floor near him, moving with surprising grace for someone so large. Derek Webb of Earth, she began formally, and Derek noticed that several other ambassadors had stopped their conversations to listen. I have been authorized by the Imperial Court to extend an invitation to you. A formal invitation of great honor. Derek felt his stomach drop. He had a feeling he knew where this was going, and he wasn't sure how to politely turn down an alien empress. Ma'am, I'm listening. The position of Imperial Dragon Handler is among the most prestigious in all of Drakmorian society. Those who hold this title are granted estates, lands, titles of nobility, and wealth beyond measure. They work directly with the imperial family, caring for and training the dragons that are the living symbols of our empire's strength. Lady S.H. Caratha's amber eyes held his gaze steadily. I am authorized to offer you this position. You would come to our homeworld, be given everything you could possibly need or want, and work with the most magnificent creatures in the known galaxy. The conference hall had gone completely quiet. Even the Voltarian ambassador, who'd been arguing loudly about shipping lanes just moments before, had stopped mid-sentence to hear Derek's response. Derek looked down at the three hatchlings. The golden one had paused in its play wrestling with the blue-purple one and was watching him with those glowing eyes. He thought about what Lady S.H. Carath was offering. Wealth, prestige, adventure. A life completely different from mopping floors and fixing broken equipment on a space station. It was the kind of opportunity that people dreamed about, the kind of thing that could change everything about his existence. Derek took a deep breath and met the ambassador's gaze. Ambassador, that's one of the kindest and most generous offers anyone has ever made me. Truly, I mean that. But I'm going to have to decline. A ripple of surprise moved through the watching crowd. Lady S.H. Caratha's expression didn't change, but Derek noticed her head tilt slightly in a gesture that might have been curiosity. May I ask why? Do you find the terms insufficient? We can negotiate further if... No, it's not that at all, Derek interrupted quickly, then worried he'd been rude. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's just, I'm happy here. I know that probably sounds strange to you. I'm just a janitor on a space station, nothing special, but I like my life. I like my routine. I like the people I work with. He scratched behind the golden hatchling's head, right in the spot it had shown him it enjoyed. I grew up on a farm where we took care of animals every day. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it felt good. It felt meaningful. And this job feels the same way. Every day I come in, I clean, I maintain things, I make sure the station runs smoothly. It's simple work, but it's honest work, and I'm good at it. Derek smiled a bit sheepishly. Besides, if I moved to your homeworld, I'd miss little things. Like Lisa's homemade cookies that she brings me on Thursdays. Or the way the observation deck looks when we pass near that blue nebula on the eastern route. Or playing poker with the engineering crew on Friday nights, even though they cheat and I always lose. Lady S.H. Carath was quiet for a long moment, and Derek worried he'd offended her. But when she spoke, her voice was warm. You have just taught me something about humans that I did not know, Derek Webb. You are not motivated primarily by ambition or desire for status. You find value in simplicity, in connection, in the quiet moments that others might overlook. She stood gracefully, and Derek scrambled to his feet as well, careful not to disturb the hatchlings too much. The ambassador continued, however, I would ask one thing of you. When we visit this station in the future, and I assure you we will visit more frequently now, would you be willing to spend time with the hatchlings? Not as an employee, not for payment, but simply as a friend to them. Derek felt relief wash over him. That he could definitely do. Absolutely. Whenever you folks come by, I'll make time for these little ones. No fancy titles needed, no payment required. I'd be happy to help. The golden hatchling chose that moment to successfully steal Derek's boot and parade around with it proudly, making the entire conference hall erupt in laughter. Even the usually stern Voltarian guards were clicking in what Derek had learned was their version of chuckling. Lady S.H. Carath bowed her head deeply, a gesture of profound respect among her people. Then we have an agreement. And Derek Webb, know that the Drakmorian Empire considers you a friend. That is a title that carries its own weight and honor, perhaps more valuable than any we could officially grant. Before she left the conference hall to return to the negotiations, the ambassador paused. I will be sending a message to the imperial court tonight. In it, I will recommend something unprecedented. That humanity be granted protected status in our empire and considered for nomination to the Council of Apex Species. Derek blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, what? That sounds important. Helen Morrison, who'd been hovering nearby taking notes this entire time, actually gasped. Derek, that's incredibly important. The Council of Apex Species is like the United Nations but for the entire galaxy. Only the most advanced, most influential civilizations get nominated. Humanity has been trying to get even considered for decades. And it may happen now, Lady S.H. Carath said, because you showed us something we had not known, that humans possess a gift for understanding and connecting with other species that transcends biology and culture. You are young as a spacefaring species, yes. You are not the strongest or most technologically advanced. But you have something perhaps more valuable, the ability to bridge divides, to see fear instead of threat, to offer comfort instead of dominance. She looked at all the ambassadors gathered in the hall. The galaxy judges species by their weapons, their ships, their conquests. But perhaps we have been measuring the wrong things. Perhaps the mark of a truly advanced species is not how well they can destroy, but how well they can understand. The negotiations concluded 2 hours later. When it was finally time for the Drakmorian delegation to leave, the hatchlings put up such a fuss that Lady SH had to promise them, in their own language, a series of chirps and rumbles that Derek couldn't understand, that they would return soon. As Derek watched them leave, the Golden One kept looking back at him until they rounded the corner and disappeared from view. He felt a strange sense of loss, which was ridiculous considering he'd only known the creatures for a handful of hours. That evening, Derek returned to his quarters exhausted. His friend Kevin from security stopped him in the hallway. "Dude, you're all over the station news feeds. They're calling you the Dragon Whisperer. Some people are even saying you're some kind of hero." Derek laughed and shook his head. "I'm not a hero, Kevin. I just sat on the floor and shared my lunch." But as he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Derek thought about everything that had happened. He just wanted to help some scared babies, and somehow that simple act had turned into something much bigger. He wondered what his parents back on the farm would think if they knew their son had accidentally become some kind of intergalactic ambassador for humanity. Across the galaxy, in the heart of the Drakmorian Empire, Lady S.H. composed her message to the Imperial Court. She described everything she'd witnessed, every detail of Derek's interaction with the hatchlings. She explained her theory about human evolution and their unique capacity for cross-species empathy. She ended her message with a single recommendation: humanity should be watched carefully, protected, and cultivated as allies. Not because they are strong but because they possess something the galaxy desperately needs: the ability to see others not as threats or tools, but as individuals worthy of understanding and compassion. In Derek Webb, a simple maintenance worker, I saw the future of what humanity could bring to our galaxy. And that future is bright. Within days, Derek's actions had spread across communication networks throughout known space. Every major civilization heard about the human janitor who calmed 3 dragon hatchlings with nothing but patience and kindness. Trade negotiations with human colonies suddenly became more favorable. Invitations to diplomatic functions that had been denied for years were suddenly extended. First contact protocols were rewritten to include human observers, valued for their ability to read and respond to new species. And Derek? He went back to mopping floors, fixing broken equipment, and living his simple life. But now, whenever he passed aliens in the corridors, they nodded to him with respect. Children of a dozen species would point and whisper when they saw him. And every few weeks, when the Drakmorian delegation visited, 3 dragon hatchlings would come bounding through the station corridors, searching for their favorite human. The galaxy had learned an important lesson: that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come in the most ordinary packages. And sometimes the heroes we need aren't warriors or leaders or geniuses. Sometimes they're just good people who see others in pain and simply choose to help.